Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist podcast, and for today's interview, I have Grayson Earle. He is an artist in residence of Zentrum für Kunst und Urbanistik. Don't know if I pronounced that right. German speakers with the Center for Art and Urbanistics, which is based in Berlin. And he's also one of the creators of Bail Bloc, which is a very interesting cryptocurrency scheme that helps people who are in need pay bail in the United States based on Monero. So, hey, Grayson, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
Yeah, you pronounced it better than I would have, by the way. So, for what it's worth.
All right, nice. I take that. So yeah, for this interview, the reason that I found Grayson is because I stumbled upon Bail Bloc, which I thought was a really interesting scheme for I think what is like objectively a good thing, a good use of cryptocurrency. And so I'm really interested in going into that. But maybe before we do that, you could give us just a quick introduction to yourself and how you came to the blockchain and crypto space. I know that isn't all that you do, but you did, at least with Bailbloc, you were sort of in it for a bit.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm an artist, and that's kind of my primary identity, I guess. Aside from also being an educator, I've taught at Oberlin College, at the City University of New York, and most recently New School in Parsons. And actually at Oberlin and Parsons, I was teaching a class called Money as Medium, where I sort of used a lot of the research that went into Bail Bloc to develop a syllabus around, thinking about leftist opportunities in cryptocurrency and blockchain, and also creative or artistic interventions into the world of economics and finance in general. And so has been really great for me and for the students. And so I was so happy to hear about your podcast, because I feel like it's something that I think about at times, and I'm like, if only there were like a serious, leftist blockchain community. And then lo and behold, you're in the
Uh,
center of that.
I spotted the hole in the market and I just dove into it.
Yeah. And then, I mean, as far as like how I got involved, I've been by trade a programmer, for most of my life now. Definitely most now that I'm becoming an old man. Um, and when I was in grad school, I was getting back into doing more programming projects because I kind of took a break for a while, and Occupy Wall Street was happening at the same time as I was managing this media lab at Hunter College as a grad student. And I was starting to investigate Bitcoin as, a technology intended to kind of circumvent the, centralized power of the banks. And so I was really just fascinated by how they accomplish that on a technological level, like what mining is and how it, decentralizes this ledger and stuff. And so anyway, I installed some mining software on all of the computers there to just sort of run at night, And at the time, it's important to say Bitcoin was worth like, I mean, $20 or something, I think.
No.
So it wasn't like a money making scheme. I kind of wish that I would have considered it that way at times, because it lasted for a couple of weeks, and then I was like, oh, that was interesting. Okay, I sort of understand this now, and I'm moving on.
Is it like
But
the story of like and then you forgot your password, or you like threw out the hard drive with the password with all the bitcoins in it or something like that?
that for me, it was just like I had two Bitcoin, and then I had the password. I'm very organized with my computing, so but I like ended up buying. I remember like there's this company called Leap that sells this controller, this like interactive controller that you use with your hand. You like hover your hand above the sensor. And anyway, they were one of these early adopters of like, you can buy this with Bitcoin. And so I spent like zero point 0.5 Bitcoin on this thing that cost like $50 US.
Nice.
But anyway, yeah. And then it just sort of it stuck in my mind as this way to generate money out of thin air, so to speak. I mean, obviously it's more complicated than that, but then it was kind of around the time that um, Donald Trump had been elected, and I was sort of like dealing with the fact that it seems like the internet, which was always heralded as this space in which progressive voices would prevail and like humankind would be united through this thing in this like post scarcity space. And clearly the right had kind of usurped that and used it for their own ends and done so more effectively than the left, frankly. And so it was kind of like, okay, collectivism doesn't work. Like all the sharing of all these articles that we were like so obsessed with, and the sort of like Bernie and then Hillary v. Donald Trump thing, like it didn't amount to anything. And so I was just like really trying to think about what it would look like to kind of really weaponize collectivism, or like what would it take for that to have a material effect on the world. And I kind of devised this project that at the time was called Redistribute, which would be like a distributed cryptocurrency mining application that then people who participated could kind of vote for where those funds were directed. And that would be a sort of like curated list. At the time, as far as I got in my thinking at the time, was like there was this thing, Black Mama Bailout, that I found really inspiring. It was basically like a fund to get Black mothers out of pretrial detention, but also like Planned Parenthood and like Greenpeace, because I knew those were three, areas of society that were going to suffer a lot under Donald Trump. And then eventually I submitted that as a grant application for this organization called iBeam, which is basically like art and digital technologies. And they kind of like award artists some funding to bring ideas to fruition. And it was rejected there. But then my friend Sam Levine, who was working at the New Inquiry as an editor and software developer, he heard the idea and was like really interested in it and brought me to the New Inquiry. And then a bunch of people there got really excited about it. And together we turned it into something that was obviously much more focused on bail as the target for its rhetoric, but also its technology. And then, the rest is history.
And that original idea is really interesting. And I mean, I don't know at the time. I don't know if the word. I don't think the word DAO was really used, decentralized autonomous organization, but it is sort of like within a similar vein. I get the impression of being able to vote on what you do with shared, collectivized resources, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that you bring that up. I was just thinking about this last night, and I was like, I think that the DAO had happened at the time, but and then I went through. There was like it was hacked and then it just like the idea never came back into the world somehow, and I was like, what is preventing that from happening again?
Yeah, I feel like only like just now, like very recently, is it really taking off. Like I think now there is much better tooling than there ever was before for starting it, or at least, these different groups are definitely attempting to. But I think partially the issue at the moment is like every fucking VC wants like every startup to become a DAO so that they can get a bunch of tokens, and there's a certain co-optation at the moment, I think, probably going on, but that's for another conversation. But I think at the very least, I think the idea of what like makes DAOs enticing is, I think basically what that original is getting at is just like the ability to have some sort of voice and say in like how resources are distributed in general.
Yeah, totally. Which is, obviously so needed. And that's kind of, I mean, I of course have heard recently about your project. And it seems like that's in some ways what that's about, right?
Eventually, it's to
Yeah.
get more socialists into that space to counter at least the VC dominated space into
Yeah.
something different. I think once the tooling is there, you just sort of have to take it and seize it, so to say.
Yeah. Totally.
Before going into exactly how Bailbloc works, I think it would be really good to have a bit of an explanation of what the situation was like now, or what the situation was like before in the United States, around bail. Since now that situation has changed, but maybe you can give like a little bit of background on, how what was going on then, and sort of describe the problem that Bailbloc was trying to solve.
Yeah, totally. I'm just going to pull up my notes so that I make sure I get some of these details correct because, well, I think I probably will anyway. It's just such a serious topic that it deserves accuracy. Um, but yeah, I mean, so at the time, some of the discussions that we were having at the New Inquiry were around this sort of like, well, yeah, when the project finally got to the New Inquiry, they brought to my attention a lot of the research they had been doing on bail. And so, as a sort of basic definition, bail is money or property that is deposited to the court by the suspect in a criminal case. And this is basically to prevent this person who's been, accused of a crime from fleeing. So, like, they say, okay, you're charged with, or you're suspected of stealing an item from a store. They basically say, okay, if you pay bail, then we'll allow you to leave and go home before your trial, and be able to sleep in your own bed and like talk to your family and stuff. But you have to pay like $5,000. And if you show up to your day in court, then you get that $5,000 back. So it's just like it's a deposit to make sure that you actually show up, because otherwise people might say, okay, here's $10,000 and then like go to Mexico, or whatever. So, but there's like obvious problems with this, right? Like, it disproportionately affects low income people. And given the history of our country, this also means it disproportionately affects people of color who are also charged or accused of crimes at a much higher rate than white people, for example. Um, and there was one story in particular, this young kid, Khalif Bowder, who was accused of stealing a backpack in New York and ended up spending over 2 years, I believe, in jail, awaiting trial on Rikers Island. He hadn't been actually like found guilty of anything. And his time was so terrible there, understandably, that he ended up taking his own life. And so, it's not as though this is like a problem that only lasts a couple of days or something. Like this can actually end up taking years because the court system is so impacted, especially in places like New York. Um, and so you have statistically a much better chance of being found innocent if you're out on bail. And in some ways, this is like a correlation problem, right? Because it's like, okay, if you have more money, then you can also afford lawyers. And so you have a better chance of defending yourself. But even controlling for those properties, like people who also get a public defendant, for example, you still have a much better chance of defending yourself in court if you are out on bail. And this is because of things like, it's going to be for sure more relaxing to be at home for 3 weeks than in a jail. You're going to be better able to like strategize with your family and like take a look at documents at your leisure and on the internet and like, you know what I mean? Like all this kind of
No,
stuff.
build your case essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to be able to build your case from the comfort of your own home. Um, and so the other sort of aspect of all of this, or actually, I should say, so the conviction rate for people not detained for pretrial detention is 50%. For those who are detained during pretrial is 92%. So it's a very telling statistic. Um, and it's always important to remember that these people have not been found guilty of anything. Like, they haven't had a day um, in court. Um, and so, oh yes, okay. So the plea bargain system kind of comes into play here. So, like, partially to deal with this overly impacted court system, the district attorney will start offering people plea bargains. And so this is basically like, okay, you're accused with this crime that is, I mean, yeah, I don't know. God, I'm like
Caught,
struggling to
caught,
think of
caught
it.
with a gram of weed or something like that.
Yeah, or like, let's say you're accused of having like 2 ounces of weed. The DA will say, okay, like that comes with a fine of $2,000 and like 6 months in jail and like 3 months of community service or something. But I'm willing to bargain with you, and we'll say that you're caught for 1 ounce, which comes with a fine of like 2 months in jail and like $1,000, And so for people who are offered this, they're looking at this like as a risk assessment. They're like, well, if I turn this down and I do go to court, which might be expensive and so on, if if I lose my case, then I'm worse off. And so this is basically like a guaranteed way of me spending less time in jail under those circumstances. So a lot of people will take this.
And I imagine a lot of times that plea bargain also affects their like ability to get a job afterwards or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're pleading guilty to
Yeah.
a crime. They're pleading guilty to a lesser crime, but a crime nonetheless. And if it is like, yeah, exactly like you're saying there on job applications, have you ever been, found guilty of a crime? You have to
Yeah.
explain yourself. And 90% of people in New York State who are offered a plea bargain will take it to avoid additional jail time and so on. And even still, in New York, they're hearing cases at like 9 p.m. on Fridays. You know what I mean? Judges are still there, like trying to get through the week's cases because there are so many of them. And so it's kind of like that's only 10% of the people that are like actually exercising their right to a free and fair trial.
Well,
Um,
so it seems also like just an issue of yeah, cops charging just an insane amount of people with crimes. They're the one creating the supply for these judges.
that's true too. Yeah. Yeah. Especially with, I'm sure, like a lot of bullshit charges.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's like one thing to be thankful for with the recent legalization of marijuana in New York is like, I'm sure that this will have a significant impact on people's lives.
Mm.
But there's still just tons of, like, regardless of what they're being accused of, none of these people have, been found guilty by a jury of their peers yet.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it's like the idea for us became, well, if that's true, if the court system already can't handle the amount of people that are taking their cases to trial, and the vast majority of people aren't taking their cases to trial, then if only like 5% more people could afford to take their case to trial, then the entire court system would break. It would collapse under its own weight. And most people, oh yeah, I forgot to say, like a lot of people will take the plea bargain because they can't afford bail. And the plea bargain might have, as part of that agreement, like, less time awaiting for sentencing or less time in jail total, right? Um, so it's really this is the kind of like all of the mechanisms that were at work. And so we were like, well, what if we tipped the scale, by allowing more people to um, afford bail by just like giving it to them.
And so by giving it to them, it also means that I guess what is also maybe nice about that particular thing. I mean, the whole system's fucked anyways, but at least when you pay it and they're found, innocent or whatever, then you get the money back and you can use that for paying other people's bail.
Yeah, totally. It's a revolving bail system. So exactly as you're saying, the vast majority of people, it's like 97% in New York, will show up for their day in trial and otherwise not violate the terms of the bail. And so, yeah, that money goes back into the bail fund and can be used to bail out more people.
So yeah, basically there's this. It's a whole racket, and it basically screws over everyone of a lower class, and then of course people who are of color because cops tend to target them, basically causing a huge traffic jam within the court system, leading to this alternative way of trying to get people to go through faster with the plea bargain, which then actually ends up fucking everybody's life up because they have to either take it or suffer through these like bogus charges potentially or what have you. And so Bail Bloc was sort of this project to see if, okay, can we take cryptocurrency to sort of help with this problem a little bit? So maybe you can explain how Bail Bloc is supposed to work.
Yeah, so it really just takes advantage of this cryptocurrency mining, which is this kind of like opt-in level of participation on a blockchain or a cryptocurrency where you put your computer to the task of, solving transactions and like helping money is one way to put it, helping the coins to move around. And so, they incentivize that process by like giving you some mining rewards in return. And we were using a mining pool, and so those rewards were like very small but very frequent. And so we would basically get like, yeah, 0.01 Monero like a couple of times a day or something. And we chose Monero because it is ASIC resistant, which means it's resistant to these application specific integrated circuits, these computers that were designed for the task of literally one thing, and that thing being mining Bitcoin or whatever. And those mean that, consumer level hardware is completely inefficient. It can't compete at all. And so Monero being one where it really only works mining on the CPU, we knew that our audience was going to be, or the participants in the project were going to be using, MacBooks and Dell laptops and stuff like that. So it had to work on the CPU. And it also seems to be like one of the most stable currencies, I think probably because it gets used more than most of them. It's like kind of like Bitcoin. It's just sort of like a store of value, and doesn't tend to get, well, I guess they're all speculative. What am I saying?
I mean, to some degree they all are, but I think what I found really interesting about Bailbloc, I mean, first is like what you're saying. There's like, of course, you have when people say mining, they usually think of like these large warehouses filled with these big boxes that are, having their fans are spinning. It's super loud and it's just like chugging the crudest oil you can possibly imagine for making Bitcoin. But in the case of Monero, they have a very different, these type of like nuances sort of matter. They're using a very different algorithm for mining the cryptocurrency, which is resistant to these like big boxes that are really loud with loud fans that most people, I think, imagine, which means that, you and I can use our computers to just open a tab and it'll run the program sort of in an opt-in way, like you said. But what also is really interesting is that I feel like it's taking this thing called cryptojacking, which I'm sure you know of, where basically a hacker hacks into your computer and they sort of sneakily mine Monero on your computer without you knowing it. So like the power of your computer sort of goes out a little bit faster, uses like 25% more energy, I think. But taking cryptojacking but making it into like an opt-in process, which is really interesting because you're opting in knowing that you can cryptojack me as long as you're going to pay bail for someone, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, totally. And it was really like kind of a funny that all of that technology was kind of happening at the same time as we were developing Bailbloc. And so like at first Bailbloc, to install it on someone's computer was like, there was no issue. And then of course, like a week into its release, a lot of the algorithms that were employed in the software were like now on all of these blacklists. And so like, virus detection was like going off for people trying to install Bailbloc, and like it became kind of a pain in the ass. And then also when I was kind of like testing it at Hunter College again, when I was working there later, one of the network IT people, because I was like making sure that it could run on like 100 computers at once, and one of the IT people is seeing all these requests to like mine.xmrpool.com or whatever, and it's like he's thinking that the school has like a botnet. So but it is kind of interesting, this like it's like, be part of the virus, because we are like attacking something, and that is this incarceral system.
Yeah. It's sort of it's a bit sort of like I don't know. It reminds me of like, I don't know if you've seen like Mr. Robot or something. It seems like something like he would do.
Yeah.
To me, it's sort of like it's taking something that, of course, is like generally deemed under most circumstances probably as like being something bad, but it sort of averts, or it sort of redirects its energy into something good, and that's sort of the idea that, or like the mentality that I think a lot of the left could take maybe when thinking about these type of technologies, that it's sort of like, yes, a lot of times these things can be bad and there are obvious issues, But if we like make an effort, if we make a program like you did with Bail Bloc, then we can at least redistribute that sort of like that profit that's being made into something that is a lot more beneficial to society. And like, yeah, I guess not be afraid of like trying something new to do some sort of like left organizing, I would say.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny because for me, coming from the study of cinema and art and so on, this is like not a new idea, right? This, as the situationists in France would say, it's détournement. You know, it's like to take something that is in motion and like redirect it somewhere else in a kind of creative or subversive way. And yeah, exactly as you're saying, like this was in this case the energy that we were redirecting is like rampant speculation by, wannabe capitalists or something, and then trying to actually put that to the task of being like actually revolutionary, because
Yeah.
there's so many of these people in the crypto space who talk about it as like a revolutionary financial system. And then you go to a crypto conference and you look around and it's like a bunch of white guys in a room. And you're like, oh, how
Right.
revolutionary. This is
Yeah.
benefiting a familiar cast of characters. And so, it's another part of this project that was really important to me was just to be put into those conversations in those spaces so that I could be like, hey, hi, everyone is talking about how this is revolutionary. And like, I want to hear how it's actually revolutionary rather than it just being like something making you rich, so to be sometimes the lone socialist at these these places speaking
Yeah.
to an audience.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. Trust me. It's yeah. When they speak of revolution, it's really just like it's a revolution maybe for the investor. Like it's like which basically just means a new way of making money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been in that situation so many times and tried to not out myself while also trying to question their their motives. But at the same time, yeah, I think what sort of I've been reading like a lot of like a bit of like Mark Fisher and like I don't know if you read like Post-Capitalist Desire, which is like the last lectures that he did, and yeah, there's I think there's like something about I don't know, he talks about this idea of like libidinal Marxism, like we need to find like this type of like libidinal energy in like the way that we organize and like the way that we like try to basically get people onto our side, and like try, I wouldn't say like co-opt, but like take advantage of movements and trends that are already happening and try to redirect it into directions that we want to see rather than seeing them as like completely separate from us, I guess. So trying to do like
Totally.
this type of I don't know, type of like cross pollination, I guess.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, yeah, there's something that happens when the left just tries to define itself in opposition to the other thing rather than kind of try to create its own narratives. And it's important to like also make it inviting and like dare I say like fun and entertaining at times so that there's some kind of like reason that people want to join in this celebration of life of like trying to create a world that actually works for everyone.
Yeah, as much as we want to believe it, but like people aren't necessarily always convinced by like rational arguments. Like sometimes
Yeah.
a little bit of craziness is maybe a good thing in some circumstances.
Yeah, totally.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist communities on Discord or Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you're enjoying the interview or find the content I make important, you can pitch into my efforts starting at $3 a month on patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist to help me out and join the newest patrons like Nick, Joseph, Graham, and Brent. Any amount really helps since making this stuff isn't free in terms of money or time. And as a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did and access to Patreon exclusive content like Q&A episodes where you can submit and vote on questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. In the last Patreon Q&A episode, I take a deeper look into the connections between blockchain, cooperatives, and decentralized autonomous organizations. Of course, I'll still be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it, so if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. So yeah, I think that's it for me. Let's get back to the interview. So now the situation around bail in the U.S. has changed a bit, and so at the moment, as far as I understand, the project is going to be winding down because of this change in the U.S. Legal system, and yeah. So I was wondering, do you know much about how that change sort of occurred and how like what the system is maybe changing to now?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, there was a steady, well, actually, a sharp increase in the available funds for these bail fund organizations. So I think, especially at the height of the last kind of wave of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, people were donating a lot of money to these funds, which is great. Um, but at a certain point, also that means that our contribution as like a relatively small player in this, the amount of money that we're raising and giving, that it became kind of less effective over time for us to continue to do this. Um, and at the same time, there's also this kind of this worry, I think, that by continuing to provide bail money, you also somehow like legitimize this system. And so there was a kind of like a moment when we thought like, oh, maybe we should be um, really focusing on the like abolitionists motives that we all have. And then also because of a lot of the organizing that was going on around bail abolition, including a ton of initiatives outside of our group, of course. A lot of places in the United States turned away from bail, and so I'm not like sure on a lot of the specifics here, but I know that in some of those places, instead of bail, I think Virginia has been cited as one of these places. They are employing some kind of like algorithmic sentencing, and so rather than using like money as the thing that determines whether or not someone is likely going to stay until their date in court, they're using other models like software driven models to determine if someone's a flight risk. And so obviously this comes with its own problems, like we're all familiar with the racism implicit in machine learning algorithms, for example, because you have this garbage in, garbage out problem where if they're fed by people living in the US, for example, then the implicit biases of these people are going to get fed into these algorithms. And so that's kind of the, I think, like where things stand right now. And a lot of people are trying to figure out how best to kind of, respond to this emerging situation. And, hope that by abolishing bail, these places don't just replace it with something that's also bad, but that cash bail should just end with no replacement.
So I mean, I guess are there? I don't know if you're aware of like, do you know of any other like I don't know maybe another country's model? Is there any option that is like either? I mean, of course, less shitty, not good probably, but like that doesn't involve like this yeah needing cash or have probably potentially racist algorithms.
That's a good question. I've been living in Europe now for about a year, and every time I present this work, I ask people like, "Do you have anything like bail here?" And people are like, "We have no idea what you're talking about." So I think there's really no reason for it. I mean, even in a kind of like uh, moderate perspective or something, it's like I think what all these places do is they just say if the crime is below this line, then you don't have to spend time in jail while you await your court date, And then like, yeah, why present an opportunity where there's going to be like stratifications in like how which people have to be in jail for longer? It's such an American thing to do that.
Yeah, there's something uniquely American, but just like there always has to be some sort of like punishment
Yeah.
in the American like it's sort of like I feel like it comes out of this like need that you have to like earn everything like this like obsession with merit maybe.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So yeah, I guess so because of this change in the American sort of legal and justice landscape because of basically I mean Black Lives Matter movement and the amount of money they were able to raise for all these different groups, it made sense to sort of wind down Bail Bloc. But maybe you can share with us some of the main, like, biggest lessons learned out of that experience. Because I think hearing the project itself, you can imagine that basically you can take the same schema, but just avert the money to some other left-wing thing that you want funded, like cooperatives, like strike funds or something, like literally anything else, but by using the same code.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as lessons learned, there's certainly a lot to say. I mean, some of the criticisms of the project were like, the environmental footprint, which I think is true and false, because the way that people were kind of thinking about it is like comparing it to these big Bitcoin mining farms and stuff. But I am also like happy to be winding the project down, knowing that the footprint is something that has always been on my mind. Uh, and I guess also there were always people who would say like, "Oh, this is such a kind of a waste. It's inefficient to run this software, or like it takes a lot of electricity, or like it takes a lot of time to generate relatively low amount of currency." What I'm doing instead is, and you all should too, like setting up a revolving donation to a bail fund. And we were always like, yes, this is like the best possible response to this, is that they feel inclined now to not argue about like, oh, this is like an unethical thing to do.
Right, like the purpose is bad, but just like this one technicality is bad. Now they have to give money.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like kind of a little Trojan horse that allowed us to like sail through a lot of these other criticisms. It was like people were just taking for granted that like, yes, like cash bail was fucked up and something should be done about it. But like, this isn't the thing. It should be this other thing. It's like, great. Uh, and yeah, the project has always been open source. And so it's still on our GitHub page for people to fork. And people have. I'm not aware of any projects that are actively using it right now. And personally, I mean, I think that if someone has a good idea for that, they should definitely do it. But I'm kind of more interested in, watching the field of crypto switch to proof of stake, rethinking projects like this in those terms. Yeah, I can think of like, yeah, community investment cooperatives, union like exactly like you're saying, generating strike funds by staking and stuff like this. Um, and then also like thinking about if the entire blockchain sphere was run by socialists, like what would that look like? And there's like, yeah, you would have like housing coin, you'd have like food coins, you'd have like strike coins, and like all of these things would be, swapped around to meet the needs of everyone. So
Yeah, indeed. That's sort of like, I mean, it's sort of the idea behind Breadchain a bit. It's not to not to like I always feel weird like plugging my own projects, but
no, but it's good. I want to hear more about it.
yeah. So originally, so Breadchain, we've been working on basically making. In case you guys don't know, it's a project that's meant to be sort of like the left wing response to the blockchain space, which we all know is somewhat dominated by more right-leaning people, more libertarian-minded, more free market sort of fundamentalists. But we wanted to see, okay, well, what do we can't just sort of like sit on our hands and like let them just sort of take over. What is sort of like a proper left-wing response? How can we sort of redirect these energies towards something that's a bit more socialist-minded? But so the first one we have, of course, is like this Breadchain crowd staking protocol, which is how we're sort of like the main way of how we're supposed to be funding projects that would be part of the network. And the original idea that I had actually, which is not how it's done right now, but the original idea I thought was so in Ethereum moving to proof of stake, you're already able to stake 32 Ether in order to be part of the beacon chain, which is like the first, basically the first chain of the first I don't know how to call it, but it's basically the start of proof of stake, and then it's going to merge with the proof of work chain. But anyways, the point was to in preparation for like this change is that you would be able to stake your 32 ETH and then provide all of the staked ETH awards, and then you would be able to sort of like create a large pool of people who are all giving their awarded ETH, and then you can sort of like choose where you want to put it, which is basically, I mean, the same thing that you basically talked about, but with mining.
Right.
So the hope was to do something like that, but realize that it's pretty complicated, especially at the moment, just because everything isn't set in motion yet. So instead of staking Ether, we're doing instead you taking advantage of DeFi protocols where you can stake your DAI, which is the US dollar pegged stablecoin, and you can stake it for Breadchain. So Breadchain, the Breadchain network would collect all of the awards that you would be generating because of your staked DAI. And then in return, you get Bread token, which is meant to be sort of like this local digital currency, which is also pegged to the dollar because you can always burn it so that you receive all of your DAI back. So it's a way of like, you're able to give without actually losing anything. That was sort of like the whole point. It's like, it's a way for, the hope is that it sort of makes people feel safer for giving their money, or like want to give money without knowing that they're going to lose it. Because I think sometimes people, they really, really want to give. Like I remember, I mean, whenever Bernie ran the first time, I was pretty poor, so I like couldn't give that much money. I was like, but man, I want to give a bunch of money, but I couldn't really do it because I didn't have much of it, and because then I would lose it, and that was sort of like my fear. But if I could sort of give it for at least the amount of time where I don't need it, which is basically what a bank does, and generates interest off of that, then I'm able to give quite a bit more money. So sort of like taking this idea of just sort of like basically collectivized gains, and then deciding totally. to put that to somewhere to better use.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I can't wait to see how that progresses and develops. But I also wonder about like beyond these kind of like fundraising tools that we're describing, like at what point can we reach out and touch and like modify the blockchain itself that these projects are existing on? Like, I can imagine these kind of, I mean, maybe this is like a silly example, or not a silly example, but like, okay, so they're like the gender wage gap or something. If everyone was getting paid in Ethereum rather than US dollars on the job market, for example, you can really easily imagine correcting this pay disparity with a line of code, right? It's like if the average salary of men is greater than the average salary of women for like the same job, then like, women's salary plus plus, for example, or like under the condition that, more than 20% of workers in the US economy feel like they're being exploited and are very unhappy, then like financial system like stops working because, or like everything is paused, like just kind of like what a sort of worker centric blockchain, which is to say like democratically and algorithmically governed financial system with the code that we can all like see and respond to. What would that look like? So I don't know.
That is something that I've been wanting to explore myself, and I think it's something that's it's I think it sounds interesting maybe to some people, but also we can't. I think the realization that at least I've gone to is that we can't get there until we have like a good grasp of what exists right now, and it's sort of going in like knowing that it's imperfect, knowing that it isn't at the moment like a worker oriented blockchain, of course not, but like that's sort of like the hand that we're dealt, and we sort of have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's true. This is where the like sort of strategy of détournement versus like complete refusal comes into play.
Right.
But yeah, and the system being the way that it is, it would require what 51% of all miners to agree to adapt these new rules or adopt these new rules that we're talking about. So maybe
Which I think is it's also a really interesting, like I feel like on a blockchain system, I mean it's not you can't make like maybe like a very direct comparison, but it's sort of like your class is very clear under a blockchain. Either you're a miner or you're a user. And it's very very similar to like thinking of, if you think of capitalism as like a platform, then there are capitalists and there are workers, and the capitalists are sort of generating capital from your work, sort of similar to how a blockchain is sort of set up at the moment. At least, it's the same thing with proof of stake for people who are staking. I mean, they're just the capitalists at that point, if you can think of it that way.
Right, totally. I think that you need to write an opinion piece on this.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really, like, if you peel it back a little bit, I think there's a lot more interesting ways of analyzing it than I think the general left has really been giving it credit for.
Yeah, I think something that you brought up before as well, is like that the left gets kind of afraid of this space because they're like, oh, it's full of libertarians and so on. And it's like, yeah, that's true, and that's exactly why it's so important that we intervene. um, if worst case scenario is like, then this becomes the new global financial system is all blockchain. It's like, well, if it's only libertarians who have been kind of active
Yeah.
here and contributing
If
to this.
Bitcoinization actually happens, then fuck.
Yeah, it's like it's an ethical imperative that we get involved, I think, and intervene and try and redirect some of this, and introduce some socialism to some of these people and to this technology.
Yeah. And I think if that does happen, I feel like maybe they're more amenable to socialism than maybe like the current regime is. But yeah, anyways. So I guess out of this experience, then it seems like your overall views didn't change too much, even like having this experience of, basically collecting all of this Monero and sort of like paying the bail for all these people. Or did you have any sort of like, I don't know, new thoughts about the technology afterwards?
That's a good question. In some ways, Bailbloc is a kind of a cynical project in its relationship to cryptocurrency, because it is about redirecting speculation. It's like purely kind of trying to take some of that energy that's coming out of investors and redirect their money, redistribute their money. Um, Whereas with something like your project, what you're describing is actually more like prefigurative, like it's about building something actually. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just always of two minds on cryptocurrency, precisely for these reasons that a lot of people don't want to get involved. Like I totally understand that impulse. But I also, I don't see why it is fundamentally at odds with my goals and with the goals of a worker controlled society, because like we were kind of speculating about earlier, there's no reason that the blockchain can't have encoded into it, because it is just a bunch of source code, that it can't have rules that govern society in a more equitable way, and like enforce resource redistribution and things like that, because a socialist society would have to have an automated system, like take care of a lot of this stuff. It would be like nonsensical for that to all be like monitored with like 19th century technology, so in some ways it's kind of very beautifully set up for these goals, but it's going to take a lot of effort, just like in anything, to get people to open their minds to that possibility, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if like socialists should just really, really focus on like basically imagining a society where you don't have to fucking work.
Mm-hmm.
What does a post-work society look like? And I think to a certain extent, we're kind of getting there, in the sense that like there's just a lot of like bullshit jobs out there where people like really aren't working all that much, or they're just like doing shit that they don't really need to do. So like, because we have just like a huge amount of surplus of commodities and things and food and everything else, at least for the moment. So I don't know. I feel like if you really want to talk about people's material conditions, you can focusing on people's Yeah, how they whether like the fact that they don't have to work, I think would be very appealing. So just making, I think, just rebrand the Socialist Party to like, I don't know, 3 day work week party or something like that.
Oh, this is so good. I think that's it. That's the idea, you know. And there was that I can't remember this I guess a book. This phrase is coming to mind, like demand full automation.
Ah, yeah, I think that was it. Nick Cernick, who made that book.
Yeah, you're right. I think so. Yeah,
As
that's
you can probably tell, I mean, maybe at this point, I've been reading a lot of like accelerationist type of stuff. So I think that's been influencing me a lot.
do you see blockchain as an inherently accelerationist technology?
I don't know, but I feel like my understanding of accelerationism is that that it's sort of like the recognition that things kind of are accelerating,
Hmm.
and it's sort of like through that acknowledgement, trying to adjust your strategy or your political organizing. Maybe I'm just like you know defining it the way that I would like it to be defined, but that's sort of kind of how I'm seeing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it does get conflated with the cynical take, which is like, should we just accelerate things to the extent that things collapse faster?
Yeah, yeah. Usually it's conflated as like things have to get worse before they get better.
Right.
Sort of like Slavoj Žižek saying that he would vote for Trump over Hillary as a type of like accelerationist thing where first we have to have the apocalypse, and then from the ashes of society we'll rebuild.
Right.
I think that's a bit of a maybe a misnomer as far as I understand. Maybe like with Nick Land, I think Nick Land is like, I think that's probably more his thing, but
Yeah.
it's not my thing.
Yeah. Me neither.
Do you have any more suggestions for people if they want to emulate a similar solution, but for other ends based on that, or do you think you've
Um,
covered it?
no, I mean, I guess actually, I mean, one thing that might be interesting for people who are interested in creating similar projects or working with the technology for similar aims is to recommend some projects to look at. There are a couple of other ones that have been really inspiring to me. One is Terra Zero, which is this project that I think at its outset, the kind of grand ideal version of it was to gift an algorithm or actually a smart contract to a forest, and then the forest would kind of sell itself off at a very slow and sustainable rate to loggers, and then it would kind of like accumulate those profits, and then over time it would then be able to like buy the next plot of forest, and in this way it could expand and expand and expand and like become autonomous and free from human intervention forever. It could just like buy its freedom. They've been doing a lot of like writing and projects to kind of like necessarily complicate this idea, because there are some questions that were posed and that they're working through. But it's a very cool project led by very cool people that I recommend everyone check out. Um, there's also Plantoid. Are you familiar with this one?
I've heard of it before. It was like an art piece, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was. I want to get her name right.
I think it was Primavera di
Di
Filippi.
Filippi. That's right. Yeah, and that one is like she's kind of imagining these things that could only exist on blockchain, like entirely new artistic modes. That is like in this case, yeah, it was a sort of sculpture of a flower that then would kind of move in order to attract people to donate to it, and then it would kind of like take those funds, and eventually it would initiate a smart contract that would like have a designer design a new version of the plantoid based on the things that it was doing that was attracting the most humans to donate to it. And then that new one would be placed into public space. And then therefore you have this kind of like self replicating sort of organism that kind of reproduces along the blockchain. Um, and so, yeah, that project in particular is not like political in nature, let's say, but I mean, just thinking creatively about some of the opportunities, some of the like very new modes where you can place rhetoric, on in blockchain. I think I would just suggest looking at those things. Also, the book artists rethinking the blockchain has been central to a lot of the classes that I teach and some of my thinking on the issue. So
Yeah, that was it was a book from Furtherfield, I
right.
believe. I had Ruth on
Oh, amazing.
a while back. Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we crossed paths many times during the sort of like 2017, 2018. Every art show was a blockchain art show. And so we were constantly put into proximity. And that was really great because she's phenomenal.
yeah. This was like, I guess this was during the time, like during the bull run, I guess, or maybe a little bit after.
Exactly.
Yeah. So everybody wanted to know what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny to hear, all of this stuff about NFTs now. People are like, oh, this new thing, NFTs. I'm like, oh man, I remember back in 2017 when they sold a cat for $250,000, on Ether. Like,
Yeah. It's really, yeah. I think a lot of people had the impression that NFTs just sort of like, I don't know, artificial, they just like came out of nowhere and it's just like all of a sudden being pushed by like Silicon Valley or something like that, which maybe to a
yeah.
certain extent is kind of true, but to a certain extent is also like having no idea about like the history behind it. That there
Yeah.
was like, a group of people doing art with blockchain well before they had before the term NFTs really came into the mainstream.
And which is to say nothing of the terrible aesthetics of the majority of these tokens, these NFTs that get put up for sale.
Like 90% of the ones that sell seem to be just like various just Ethereum or whatever memes
Yeah.
for some reason by it. I guess now it's sort of like, I don't know if you've seen, but like the profile picture ones. Now it's like everybody has like a different profile picture. First you had the crypto punks, which are like these like I think 24 by 24 pixels or something like that. And now you have like you got penguins, you got apes, you got like every other animal now where they have a set of like 1,000 different profile pictures that you can buy and say is yours.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So yeah, that's becoming a thing. Which I mean, maybe there's something interesting about it. Like, what if we had I don't know, communist organization where each member had its own
Yeah.
PFP on the blockchain? Maybe that's something cool, but I don't know.
Well, let's try it out.
We'll each have our own like little I don't know. One guy will be Marx, one guy will be the other philosopher Engels,
I call Marx.
be a Lenin one. Yeah.
Or maybe Trotsky. I don't know.
But yeah, cool. I think I'm basically at the end of my questions. So maybe to finish it off, well, first off, it was really interesting talking to you, and I'm really glad you're able to share your experience about Bailbloc. I think people, if they're interested, even a little bit, might as well go and copy the code and have it somewhere, just to be able to to start thinking about maybe how you can do something similar if you're interested. But yeah, maybe you can share with us where people can keep up with you and your work.
Oh, yeah. You can keep up with me on, well, I have a website, graysonearle.com, which is GraysoneEarle.com. Also on Instagram at prismspecs, which I should spell out is PRISMSPECS, Prism Specs. Yeah, I'm involved in all kinds of leftist art and activist projects. So definitely, get in touch, check out the projects, and I'll see some of you in the streets, I imagine.
All right, cool. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.